Hey, yo.
If I can be serious for a minute.
Oh, yeah. Acknowledge me. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Dirty Birds Territory Treasures. I am the Dirty Bird. I want to thank everybody listening on all those podcast platforms right there. Appreciate you checking out my little side project here. I am the Dirty Bird of the Sit Down Marks podcast, and really appreciate you checking out my little side project here as I talk about old wrestlers, old referees, old managers from back in the old days, back when the territories ruled the earth. And today's territory treasure is the greatest and best referee that there ever was, Tommy Young. Let's get into it. So Tommy Young, right? The standard bearer to which all referees are compared to, if you ask me. I mean, we've heard of Nick Patrick, Charles Robinson, Red Shoes in Japan, Chad Patton, the newest best referee in WWE. We know Earl Hebner. We know Tim White, Jimmy Corderas. But the original, the icon, the referee of referees to me was Tommy Young. So let's get into it. The territory was NWA, 1970s and 80s. Tommy was best known in Jim Crockett Promotions. He was born July 9th, 1947 in North Carolina, God's country, to those of us that were born in North Carolina, as us natives call it. His shoot name was Thomas Mackley. He debuted in 1971 and retired in 1989. But let me tell you, Tommy created the template for which all referees should be, if you ask me, or should study and aspire to be like. So you may be asking yourself, what made Tommy so great, you ask? Well, Tommy was the official and first ever third man in the ring. He sold bumps, had arguments between wrestlers. His facial expressions help sell the match, sell the beef that the wrestlers had with each other. He was known for upholding the rules and the integrity of wrestling. You know, he was probably, if you ask anybody from the old days, you know, what was like the first thing that you remember from Tommy? You know, he was known for checking the shoulder, you see. If there was a wrestler being pinned or lateral pressed, if you will, that their, shoulder was down on the mat, he would always slide his hand up under their shoulder to make sure that it was down. As per rules of the match, both shoulders have to be on the mat to be pinned. So, which is something that's looked over by so many referees, these days. We really need to get back to that for the greater good of wrestling, but he would always check that shoulder first before he would, start his 1, 2, 3 count. Probably one of the best things about Tommy, he was just a master of body language, to help sell a match when a wrestler was getting out of hand or he was hurt, or took a bump. Tommy always looked genuinely concerned, like for the talent. He was ahead of his time, man. He really was. You know what I mean? I think a lot of referees these days, could learn, from Tommy. He was, one of the first referees to jump back and kind of clinch up when a big bump, happens. Tommy, to me, also, he had the perfect build and body shape for a referee. He knew the business. He knew how to help get guys over. He knew how to help heels be heels. And just had a knack for being in the right place at the right time to make a 1, 2, 3 count. He was always paying attention to the actions of the heels, his work with the managers, that kind of stuff. But maybe the Tommy Slide. We're going to talk about the Tommy Slide here in just a second. It's another one of his popular moves as a referee. You probably saying to yourself, why does this guy have popular moves if he's a referee? Well, it became legendary. Excuse me. He joined Jim Crockett Promotions in 1975, and by the 80s, he was a senior referee. He did most of Jim Crockett Promotions heavyweight title matches. He always did the main events. But to really learn how to be a good ref, he's always said he trained as a wrestler first. And he knew he wasn't good at it, so that's why he ended up being a referee. The story he tells is he paid like $300 to be trained, and it just didn't work out. But he got into refereeing when there was, allegedly, the story goes, there was a referee for a show that Tommy was on that didn't show up. So Tommy stepped in to referee, this match, this card, and the rest is history, so to speak. Kind of like the way these things usually happen, right? A lot of times Tommy was the only referee on a card for Jim Crockett Promotions. So, imagine refereeing every single match on a card, right? You got to be passionate about what you do, and you really got to love it. But let's get back to the slide, right? So I told you he would get in there and check those shoulders, but getting there where he would just slide all the way across the ring when a pin was about to happen. The slide maybe next to checking the shoulders, probably what Tommy's known for. He could slide across the ring and land like literally right next to where he needs to be making the pin to count to 1, 2, 3, just with precision. Nailed it, almost every time. Tommy was always big on kayfabe. He didn't want to be seen with the wrestlers outside the arenas. He didn't want to be seen hanging by the pool, with the wrestlers, or out at a bar or having dinner. He didn't want there to be any assumed favoritism, because referees are supposed to call it down the middle, right? No favorites. I think we could maybe go back to some of this. It's not a bad idea, right? Because referees supposed to be have no favorites, call it right down the middle, not lean one way or the other. And for some of the better referees that are out there in the business now, you ask them, who did they study? And a lot of them will say Tommy Young. He had a knack for making matches feel more important, because his presence alone in the match, gave him that like big fight feel that, Tommy was there. He knew it was going to be a big fight. Tommy's, refereeing the match, because we had to have the right call, had to have, the heel versus the face, and somebody general in between to make the calls and count the 1, 2, 3, and not have any favoritism. He was a by the rules referee. Nothing happened without him allowing it. Should have probably be studied by every ref ever, honestly, because the ref's number one job is to help the wrestlers, keep them safe. And Tommy did that, but maybe on top of everything else. And, he was kind of an entertainer himself. I mentioned his facial expressions, body language. He got heat from wrestlers for being too animated. Sometimes they thought it kind of, took away from the match. They called it took away from them. If Tommy was was too over the top with his expressions, or thought he drew too much attention to himself. But what I always remember is like Tommy's real synonymous with the Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat matches. I always feel like he was there for a lot of those. Tommy had a lot of accolades. He won Referee of the Year in 81, 82, 83, 85, and 1986. He's been married to same woman for over 40 years. He's got 6 kids. He's definitely the most recognizable referee in NWA history, if you ask me, in my opinion. He did have a small little stint in IWA briefly, where he refereed guys like Terry Gordy and Thunderbolt Patterson. And Tommy sometimes got heat from fans too. Tommy said that, obviously, we get mad at the ref sometimes, counting too slow, or didn't see when a certain pin was happening, that kind of stuff. Tommy talks about fans spitting on him, shooting bottle rockets at his car as he leaves the arena. Fans gave him grief a lot, but Tommy loved it, loved the business. And and if he's probably doing his job right if they were doing that, so to speak. Tommy had to get out of wrestling early. He had a planned spot in a match in 1989 during a Tommy Wildfire Rich versus Mike Rotunda match. So there was going to be a planned spot where he was going to be pushed away from Tommy, and he ended up tripping and breaking his neck after he landed kind of awkwardly in the ropes during the match. A very young Jim Ross is on the commentary for that match. It's kind of wild that's how he ended up getting hurt and kind of fading out of the business. But go look up matches with Tommy Young as referee. If you're a referee or inspiring referee, definitely go check out his work, because he was the best. That's just, in my opinion. Outside of wrestling, after that, the injury happened. He didn't come back. He was, he did some, you can still see him at some conventions and signings and that kind of stuff if you get a chance. But to me also too, Tommy created the idea that referees was an authority figure in the ring. There was the one that had to maintain the rules and the laws of wrestling. He can make a wrestler face, heel, manager, commentator, whatever, just by his interactions. Tommy was the best, ever, period, to me, as I've said. He kind of made referees get respected too when they, when he came around and established himself as referees weren't just an extra guy in the ring to count, 1, 2, 3. They could add to the story. They could add to the match. They could add to a person getting over as a heel or face, that kind of stuff. So, but Tommy just, he was the referee of my childhood, and that's what I remember most. And so normally when I do these territory treasures, I always have a connection. Well, let me tell you something. So Tommy had lots of fun interactions with wrestlers and managers, notably like Jim Cornette, when Rock and Roll Express was feuding with Midnight Express. Tommy was a big part of that rivalry, and he helped make it what it was, enforcing the rules, interacting with Jim, taking away Jim's tennis racket, throwing him out of the arena from ringside, but probably the most I remember about Tommy is his interactions with Ric Flair. They were just the absolute best, bar none. Probably the best wrestler referee interactions ever. Tommy would enforce the rules. Rick would often lash out or push back on Tommy, to which Tommy would push Flair back, and Flair would, take a bump for him on occasion. Their back and forth banter made for great TV, and add so much to Flair's matches. They had a chemistry, I think, like no other referee and wrestler did. Flair's mentioned a lot of times how Tommy has helped him get through, these 1 hour long matches, or when the guy he was wrestling got tired, he could give him a break, by having a little back and forth with Tommy Young. They were, just professionals on the, at the top of their game. You know what I mean? Tommy was a kind of a cut from a cloth of his own, if you ask me. I can still, to this day, see in my head sliding across the ring to make the count, checking the shoulder. Tommy's just one of those kind of guys that, timeless. Yes, I did grow up on NWA wrestling and 605 World Championship Wrestling on TBS, all that kind of stuff. But do yourself a favor, man. Go look up a Tommy Young match, today and check it out. I want to thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you guys next time. I appreciate you tuning in today. I'll dive into another Territory Treasures.